The next day the situation on our front changed dramatically. A powerful German and Romanian offensive began with the forcing of the Prut River. Squadrons, having received a new combat task, one after another went to the area of Aviation. The day was hot and tense. Having refueled with fuel and ammunition, our unit again flew to storm the enemy troops. In front of the link under the command of Fyodor Atrashkevich, and behind him, in a column, the rest. Before the crossing we noticed an accumulation of the enemy tanks, cars, artillery. Towards us the tracks flashed. Having broken through their barrier, we threw bombs with diving, fired at targets from machine guns. With the gain of altitude, stretch out one after another in a circle, dive again. Under us burning cars, in all directions run and fall infantrymen. Anti-aircraft fire raging. Suddenly, behind the front plane stretched a stream of smoke and fire. Atrashkevich was leading the group. It means that his machine was hit by an anti-aircraft gun. How my heart ached at that moment. Everyone was watching the plane of the squadron commander. The flames flared up. It was clear that he would not reach his own. And suddenly the plane, from a horizontal position, went into a dive. It was clear that he aimed into the thick of the enemy's equipment. The explosion scattered it. Our commander died a heroic death. Whether Atrashkevich decided to go for a ram or was killed in the air, we will never know. There was no radio station on the plane. All of us knew him as a brave air fighter, intelligent and soulful man, demanding and thoughtful commander. In the most difficult time of the Great Patriotic War, in its initial period, he taught us to fight, learned himself, was an example of selflessness. Above all, Fyodor Vasilievich valued in a fighter the ability to fulfill a combat mission to the end, developed in pilots courage and boldness, initiative and perseverance. We respected the commander, valued his word, valued his assessment and advice. The commander's death caused fury in all pilots of the group. We were diving on anti-aircraft batteries, ready to ram them with our MiGs. Each strived to accurately smash the enemy, all the skill put into the attack. Having landed, I did not move away from the plane, waiting for the pilots. To me slowly approached technician Fyodor Vasilievich Atrashkevich. He already realized by the numbers of downed planes the commander did not return from the mission. But approaching me, he still did not lose hope. There was still a thought in him. Atrashkevich was not killed. He threw himself out with a parachute or sat down involuntarily. He asked in a strangled voice, "What about the commander, Comrade Senior Lieutenant?" "He's gone," I replied with difficulty. "An anti-aircraft gun shot him down." We stand there silent, with our heads down. Such is the fate of a combat crew. Pilots die in the sky, and technicians long survive the loss. Blood spilled in battle, even stronger strengthens the battle friendship between the flight and technical staff. Having seen off a pilot in combat flight, each technician is eagerly awaiting his return. He anxiously looks at the horizon, carefully watches the flight numbers of landing vehicles. These moments bring him joy or sorrow. When pilots rest after a busy day of fighting, technicians and motorists have time to patch up all the holes in the aircraft, remove the damaged engine, put a new one. Successes in the sky largely depend on the golden hands of these people, their unparalleled patriotism and diligence. To my airplane gathered the entire squadron. Ivanov came out of the approaching MK. I reported to him the circumstances of the death of F.V. Atrashkevich. "Pity. Such a man and commander lost," Ivanov said with a sigh. For a while he stood silently experiencing the loss. Then he looked around at everyone. "Well, why are you hanging your noses? The living should beat the enemy even more viciously and avenge their dead comrades." Ivanov's words didn't make it any easier, but somehow everyone cheered up and raised their heads at once. Until the arrival of Sokolov's squadron commander appointed Pokrishkin. All looked at me. What were they thinking about? Maybe about Atrashkevich. He was a real commander. I was thinking about whether I could cope with the duties assigned to me in this difficult period. I realized that I had all the responsibility for the people and combat activity of the squadron. I knew that I would have to act in isolation from the regiment. It is not easy to replace such a commander as Fyodor Vasilievich. Pokrishkin immediately sent an advance team to Sincieria. Afterward, come to the command post to clarify all the issues of your work there. Having already got into the car, ordered V.P. Ivanov. Yes, comrade regiment commander. An hour later, cars with personnel, ammunition and fuel stretched into a column, dusted on the road to the west. The field near the Moldavian village of Sinshraya should become our jump-off airfield closer to the front line. I already knew that from it we would make assault strikes on enemy columns and make sorties to intercept enemy planes, raids on Hitler's troop concentrations. By the evening of the next day, Mayaki was informed by telephone that Sinshraya was ready to receive us. Having made sorties for assault and reconnaissance in the morning, the squadron in full squadron soon landed at the airfield near Sinshraya. The commissar of our unit, Barishev, appointed by the chief of the commandant's office, met me and showed me everything that had been done on this field to ensure combat operations. The advance team worked hard. There were shelters for fuel and ammunition, trenches for personnel, and a small dugout for the command post. The airfield had a serious disadvantage: the limited size of the runway. The landing of an airplane had to be extremely precise. An error in the calculation threatened a flying accident. It is good that the squadron pilots were trained to land with gas, and their first landing was without breakage. This is how the new method of landing calculation came in handy in combat conditions. Combat reality forced us to adopt everything new and advanced, which gave birth to creative initiative. I gathered the pilots. Once again, now already in place, reminded about the features of landing, and then offered a thoughtful version of the day's actions. We were to make assault strikes in 2 directions in the area of Ungaini, roads from it to Kishinev, and also northwest of Balti, where Hitlerites, having forced Prut, were on the offensive. It seemed to me that the most expedient to act on these disconnected directions as a single group, as a part of the whole squadron. In this case, 2 or 3 links strike, and one suppresses anti-aircraft fire and covers the attackers from surprise attacks of enemy fighters. Under such conditions, the strikes will be more effective, and we will suffer fewer losses. I knew from myself that the condition of a pilot going into an assault attack is much higher when you feel the elbow of a comrade. You know that you are covered. Air fighter more accurately goes to the target, more reliably hit it. When there is no one near you at the moment of an assault, you are distracted by the inspection of the airspace and can make mistakes in aiming. Following Suvorov's rule, every soldier must know his maneuver. I consulted with the pilots. They fully approved of my suggestions. Having finished refueling planes, fly out to attack 8. From above we are covered by a couple of MiGs. Here is already under us the enemy. The road from Ungaini to Chisinau is full of cars and artillery. Ehrlichen shells are flying towards us. The covering pair dives on the anti-aircraft battery and suppresses it. We, having dropped bombs on clusters of vehicles, became in a circle and began to process targets with guns and machine guns. Everyone acted bravely, diligently. Already leaving for the airfield, I looked back. I can't hide columns of smoke from burning cars pleased my eyes. And the group had no losses. Only one airplane received serious damage from anti-aircraft fire, but landed safely. He immediately engaged in technicians. In the hands of these skilled craftsmen, the machine by morning was again in full combat readiness. Then they made a combat sortie to the area northwest of Balti. But now the attacking group was strengthened. It consisted of 2 links, and covering as part of a link. The raid just conducted showed that a pair of MiGs may not be enough to suppress the anti-aircraft guns. Until the evening we made several combat sorties. Then the squadron landed in Mayaki. The command did not dare to leave us at the airfield for the night because of the lack of proper security. The front was very close. Regimental Commander Ivanov listened to the report on the results of actions in the area of Sinshraya silently. He clarified the results of the day. For some reason your work is dissatisfied with Osipenko. He thinks that you have not done enough raids. How little. Each pilot had twice as many sorties as it was set. He demands to attack in platoons, uninterruptedly, in every direction in the area of Ungaini and northwest of Balti. It will be pinpricks. In a couple of days, perhaps, we will be left without airplanes. The commander of the regiment once again, going into details, asked me about each flight, its results, the presence of anti-aircraft facilities of the enemy, meetings with enemy fighters. Apparently he came to a certain conclusion. Well, all right. Act like this and continue. Conversation with the division commander, I'll take over. For tomorrow you have the same tasks. And now rest. On the way to the dining room, thoughts involuntarily returned to the evaluation of today's actions of the squadron, which gave the commander of the compound. The pilots went through the heat of anti-aircraft fire, did everything possible to help our infantry, inflicted tangible damage to the enemy. We did not lose a single airplane, and yet the division commander was dissatisfied with the results of our combat work. Why? I understood the desire of the leadership to throw all forces, effectively use all means to delay the Nazi offensive, but the capabilities of fighters should be used wisely. Of course, it is impossible to send bombers to this scorcher in the daytime. On obsolete machines, SB gas tanks are not covered with rubber projector, and even from a bullet or shell they burn like torches. It is right that they strike mostly at night, so the fighters will have to take on enemy troops in daylight assaults. But tactics must be effective. I was confident in the correctness of the squadron and decided to build the same combat order tomorrow. Assault strikes of the entire squadron on the advancing enemy justified themselves in the new battles. The day passed tensely, among machine gun and cannon tracks, bursting shells. In this dance of death, everyone could die at any moment. But the soldiers bravely and courageously crushed the enemy. In one of the sorties, an anti-aircraft shell exploded in Dovmy's airplane. The pilot managed to eject from the burning MiG. We saw that he landed by parachute where he had dropped the bombs. It was difficult to determine whether Dovmy reached the ground alive or not. Already in the evening, having made the last sortie to attack the enemy, breaking through to Balti, the squadron had to refuel with fuel and ammunition and fly overnight to Mayaki. I decided to use this opportunity to go behind Balti and search for enemy planes there, or to storm the targets on the ground. This decision met with full approval of the pilots. First of all, we sent to Mayaki the planes that were damaged in today's battles. And then the 5 took a course to Balti. I paired with Lukashevich flew at a height of 1,000 meters, and the link led by Darchenko 300 meters above us. The setting sun, smoke from the burning villages, dust and cinders prevented us from searching for targets in the air and on the ground. And nevertheless, on a country road we found a small column of cars. It was heading towards Balti. Having given a command to the group of airplane evolutions, I steeply descended to the target. At an altitude of about 600 meters, I noticed a German scout and adjuster Henschel 126 on the light background of the sky above us. Immediately realized that he was below us. We did not notice him against the dark background of the ground. Now he is higher and his crew can't see us. We should take advantage of that. It's a very tempting and important target. It must be carrying data on our troops. Knowing the high maneuverability of the Henschel, that it can easily elude a high-speed fighter, I decide to sneak up on it from below, camouflaged by the ground background. The maneuver was a complete success. The crew of the enemy scout did not notice the attacking MiG. Approaching the Henschel at 70 meters, I opened fire. The twilight sky was streaked with bright fire trails. They penetrated from below the fuselage and engine of the scout. Some white sheets flew past me. What is it? But immediately I realized that they were pieces of Dural. Henschel fell into a steep spiral, and leaving behind a long plume of black smoke, began to fall to the ground. After the attack, looked around carefully. There were no enemy airplanes in the air. I decided to follow the fall of the scout. This time the observation of Henschel was not in vain. At the very ground it came out of the spiral, and with smoke behind the tail pulled to the west. Cunning bastard. He's trying to get away. No way. I throw the MiG in to dive and catch up with the Henschel. The anti-aircraft machine gun trails are flying all around me. It's from below trying to help there. The enemy airplane is in my sights. And then suddenly something hit my plane, burned my chin. The swirls of the air jet splattered blood across the plexiglass of the lantern. Apparently I was attacked by Messerschmitts, I thought, and quickly glanced back. There, behind me, Lukashevich. So hit the anti-aircraft gun. I did not stop pursuing the Nazi scout. I catch up with Henschel and pierce it with a line of BS and Schkars. Soon I see how it crashed into the ground and, turning over, exploded. I direct the MiG to gain altitude left combat turn. But what is it? From the southwest, towards me and 100 meters above me, another Henschel 126 is approaching. Apparently, it is replacing the one that is already burning on the ground. It flies quietly, not noticing our pair. I decide to repeat the maneuver. Also camouflaged by the dark background of the ground, I sneak up to him under his belly and shoot him with a line of all weapons. The Henschel immediately went into a corkscrew. No, you can't fool me. The first one already tried to get away. It didn't work. With a vigorous flip, I bring the MiG into vertical dive and try to catch the corkscrewing Henschel in the crosshairs. And then I see how the ground is rapidly closing in on me. Instantly, I make a jerk of the control stick, and from the huge overload of the MiG, coming sharply out of the dive, I lose consciousness. I woke up when the airplane at the very ground had time to go into horizontal flight. I went upwards in a right combat turn and looked for the attacked enemy airplane. I saw it burning on the ground. At the same time, I found out that there was no sliding part of the cockpit lantern above me. The oncoming jet of air was hitting me in the face. Then I realized what a huge overload was on the way out of the dive. The sliding part of the lantern had blown off. How could I withstand it? I made a decision on the damaged airplane not to make an assault strike on a ground target and to leave for Myaki. After turning into the parking lot of the plane, Vakhnenko ran up to me. He stared at me anxiously. "What's wrong with you? You have blood all over your face." "It's nothing." The bullet caught my chin. "The car's been hit pretty bad. There is enough work for the whole night," I answered him, with difficulty getting out of the cabin. Soon at my MiG gathered pilots of the squadron. The ambulance arrived. "Let's go to the sanitary unit," demanded the doctor. "Do not interfere, doctor. Let us talk about the battle. Please wipe the blood from your face." Briefly shared impressions of the combat flight, and Vakhnenko at that time carefully examined the airplane, the parachute. Then came to me, waited for a pause in our conversation. "Well, Comrade Commander, you were born in a shirt, to live until the end of the war after such an incident." "What are you talking about?" "Look at the way the bullet bypassed you. You were at the top of the narrow triangle of the bullet's flight, and you were saved from death by some millimeters," said the technician. "What are you saying?" "Interesting." "That's right. The bullet was a good one. It entered the right side of the cabin and caught the shoulder straps of the parachute on the back, hit the roller of the sliding part of the lantern on the left side, ricocheted off to the right again, catching the chin and damaging the lantern. Yes, millimeters saved a life." Having reported to the regiment commander about the results of the combat day and the last sortie, I again analysed the course of the battle with Henschel. I was all twitchy when I reconstructed in detail the dive attack. It almost led to a collision with the ground. The conclusion is clear: before going into an attack, you must assess the situation well. Haste in battle is dangerous. It has nothing to do with energetic, decisive actions. That's how, on bitter experience, another rule of combat was born. And the only thing that saved me from death was high physical training, the ability to endure great overloads. So step by step the peculiarities of fighting were learned and mastered, experience came, qualities necessary for a real fighter were formed. The morning confused all our battle plans, came from the north cold air masses. They covered the airfields of the division with fog. It was impossible to fly. The pilots, who arrived at the airfield at dawn, immediately collapsed on the covers under the wings of airplanes. The short nights of the first days of July did not allow for a good rest. Sleep was not only short, but also disturbing. The pilots were shouting something during their sleep, reliving again the combat events of the past day. After such a dream, from early dawn to darkness, air battles, assaults, other combat work. Fog soon cleared the airfield. The regiment commander immediately sent to scout the weather pilot Dubinin. It was a reasonable decision. The weather service does not give data, but the weather is the main thing for us now. Immediately after takeoff, I-16 disappeared in the fog. The sound of its engine gradually faded. We had to wait for Dubinin's return. I went along the parking lot to talk to the technical staff. It's not often that I have time for that. With engineer Kopilov, we once again discussed what work should be done on the aircraft in the near future, how to replenish supplies, so necessary in combat conditions, where to get tools. Talked with the armament, some technicians. I see, under the wing of the airplane, Dyachenko gathered almost all the pilots of the squadron. There was laughter. I approached them. What are you arguing about? Why are you awake? Yes, here Dyachenko compares our assaults to the performances of gymnasts under the dome of the circus, explained Lukashevich. So we argued. Why, comrade commander? A lot of similarities. We in the assault spinning over the enemy and risk ourselves, as gymnasts in the performance without insurance. Exciting moment, deadly dangerous number, under the dome of the circus is announced. The drums beat, and everyone holds their breath and waits. Gymnasts sometimes fall off the trapeze. Finish the jar. While there is still time, sleep, I strictly said, and went further along the parking lot. I was walking and thought maybe such conversations distract pilots from heavy thoughts, serve as a kind of discharge. They honestly fulfill their duty. Each of them indivisibly believes in our victory, doing everything to bring this bright day closer. 2 hours passed, and Dubinin was still not there. It's useless to wait. We can only hope that he sat down somewhere involuntarily because of fuel exhaustion or engine failure. What really happened to Dubinin we learned only a few days later, and the following happened. Over the front line, the fog cleared earlier than in our area. The weather became clear. The absence of Soviet aviation in the air allowed Hitler's pilots to fly with impunity. A pair of Mi-109s detected a single I-16 and did their best to shoot down Dubinin. Maneuvering near the ground, he masterfully evaded from under the tracks of Messerschmitts. Without success, the Nazi pilots decided to take the I-16 in pincers. Dubinin, looking at the rear, did not notice the haystack and caught it. I-16 bounced upwards from the impact. The main 109 attacking head-on did not have time to dodge and crashed into the keel of our plane. From the second strong impact broke the harness, and Dubinin was thrown out of the cockpit. The enemy pilot burned in the wreckage of his airplane. Fortunately, all this happened before the eyes of local residents. They took Dubinin to the hospital, where he lay without memory for more than a week. After recovery, Dubinin could no longer fly Dubinin and moved to the staff work. By 11 o'clock the sun warmed up, and the fog quickly began to dissipate. The pilots were impatiently waiting for permission to take off. Finally, Ivanov arrived and ordered me to gather the pilots to receive their assignments. I immediately sent motorists for the flying staff. The commander of the regiment ordered Selivastov to fly out to reconnoitre the advance of enemy troops in the direction of Balti, as well as crossings across the Prut. An independent task was assigned to Fijichev's wing. 2 units under the command of Ivanov himself were to fly out to storm the enemy troops on the road Ungeni-Balti. In this 6 was also my link. I silently listened to the tasks for the day. Although I will not hide, I was concerned. However, I understood that such a method of action was in accordance with the requirements of the division commander. Apparently, to restore order in the squadron, Ivanov that day and came to us in Sinsinseria. A premonition suggested that today's day would not end well. Soon Selivastov's and Fijichev's squadrons took to the air. 20 minutes later, our 6 flew out. We set a course for Balti. Soon on the road, which led from the south to the city, we found a large column of covered cars. White circles on the roofs were clearly visible from above. Above the column calmly circled Scout Henschel 126. E.P. Ivanov attacked it and set it on fire. The plane began to fall, and suddenly the left wingman in Ivanov's wing rushed after him. Caught up and at a height of 300 meters opened fire. Attack already burning enemy aircraft surprised me. By the location of planes in the links, I determined that Semyonov took this maneuver. Almost colliding with the Henschel, he sharply turned aside and up. Such rude actions in piloting at low speed MiG-3 does not tolerate. The airplane immediately fell into a corkscrew. The low altitude did not allow to bring the fighter into horizontal flight. It crashed into the ground and exploded. Not far from the fallen MiG collapsed and Henschel. What pushed Semenov to attack? If our planes had a radio station, Ivanov or I would have yelled at the pilot. This event, which occurred literally within a minute, stunned all the pilots of the group. But under us was an enemy column of vehicles. We had to act immediately. Ivanov put the plane into a dive, and we, stretching behind him, rushed to the target. After the first strike, several cars caught fire. Repeated approach to attack burning cars were added. Anti-aircraft opposition was weak, and it was possible to continue the assault. But I had a thought. Henschel, at the time of the attack on him, could radio to call fighters. What if they suddenly appeared? After the second attack, scrutinized the southern part of the airspace. As I suspected on us, smoking engines from working on the afterburner rushed 8 Messerschmitt. Without wasting a minute, jumped out in front of our group, shaking the airplane warned of the danger. Then I rushed towards the Messers with a combat turn. No one followed me. Ivanov built a group and took a course for Sinceria. It was, apparently, a reasonable decision. And now I had only one way out of fight. 4 Messerschmitts aimed at my plane, and another went to catch up with our group. The fight was divided into 2 hotbeds. I spun under the clouds on turns. On vertical maneuvers did not allow to go to the black storm clouds. Here's one of the Me-109s almost in my sights. It is only necessary to take a reproach to bring the crosshairs ahead of the engine. I slightly pulled the control knob, and my MiG, trembling, began to enter the corkscrew. By giving the handle away from myself, went into a dive and, having accelerated the airplane, vigorously went up the hill. Thus transferred the fight to the vertical, a more desirable way for me. Messerschmitts tried to catch me in the sight, circling on the horizontal. Skipping between them, flew into the clouds. I tried to go down by turning over, hanging on the shoulder straps. Suddenly I feel point blows on my forehead. I guess it's hail. I have no sliding part of the lantern, it was torn off in yesterday's battle. These thoughts flashed through my mind in a moment, and here I am diving out of the clouds. My plan was successful. Right in front of me I see Messerschmitt. I energetically bring the plane out of dive and shoot the Nazi at point-blank range. Immediately I brought the airplane down again. I did it just in time a shell track passed by. I went out again on the hill. I see a downed Me-109 rushing past me with a long plume of smoke. Hitler's pilots reduced activity and made cautious attempts, dodging attacks, to draw into the battle on horizontal maneuvers. I knew that the Me-109 had advantages over the MiG on turns and continued to drag the Nazis to the vertical. After a few minutes, Messerschmitts turned around and left in the southern direction. I still maneuvered for some time, surveying the surrounding space. Seeing neither strangers nor ours, I spiked down to the ground and headed for Sinceria. The landing was difficult. My fighter almost rolled over the edge of the runway, where the damaged airplane was standing. By the number on the board determined that it was scapitized hit in the trench MiG Selivestov. This was not enough for our squadron, thought bitterly. Semyonov died, Selivestov scapitized. A bad start to the combat day. However, on the ground I learned that this was not all. When our group was leaving after the assault, the Messerschmitts pursuing them shot down the wingman of Viktor Petrovich Ivanov. Junior Lieutenant Ovsyankin made an emergency landing with retracted landing gear on the field. Squadron engineer Kopylov, seeing how saddened I was by this news, concluded, "Do not be upset about these breakdowns. By morning we will repair. The airplanes will be in service." Of course, most of all we were worried about Semenov's death. In my memory I again reconstructed the whole picture of his attack. Now I had no doubt that the main cause of the disaster was his poor knowledge of the peculiarities of the MiG operation. This was manifested by Semenov in the battle near Ungeni, where he gave the engine afterburner without first lightening the propeller. And now he was attacking at low speed and tried to sharply avoid collision with a burning Henschel. The war did not give us time to retrain for the new technique. My memory took me back to the first days of the war. Fyodor Kurilov, an inspector of the regiment on piloting technique, made a similar mistake in piloting a MiG in front of all pilots. His group was approaching the airfield after a combat mission. One of the pilots violated the landing order. Fyodor Kurilov, with a gain of altitude, turned the plane to the side, and the MiG instantly flipped into a corkscrew. 200 meters of altitude could not save even such an experienced pilot. No matter how hard it was, there was no time to grieve. We have to fulfill combat missions. Again, we went to attack the enemy, who came close to Balti. There were a lot of targets. We quickly used up ammunition. After the group landed, the squadron Commissar Bereshev and engineer Kopilov hurriedly came to me. I see anxiety in their eyes. What happened? Why so quickly returned? They ask. Soon we will not waste time on the route at all. Immediately after takeoff, we'll go on an assault. In a couple of days, the enemy will capture Balti. That's it. Get ready for relocation to Myaki, I explained. And when will we leave here? Asked Commissar Bereshev. Ivanov is now at the command post to find out this question from Osipenko. Although the orders are dictated by the enemy, you do not leave here without orders, or you will be court-martialed. Calmly, we must prepare equipment and people for departure. Don't leave a single cartridge or a single liter of fuel. What you can't take, burn and blow up, including our command center. The technical staff had not yet had time to refuel all the planes with fuel and ammunition, as they heard a rumble, and then saw a group of German bombers. Jumping into the cockpits, started the engines. Dyachenko and Lukashevich flew out with me. The rest of the planes were not ready for takeoff. I thought that the enemy aimed at our airfield, but the bombers were heading for Kishinev. We rushed to intercept them. Our trio attacked a group of 7 U-88s. I and Dyachenko immediately shot down 2 bombers. Junkers, having dropped bombs in the field, began to turn abruptly, but our wing went on the attack again. Only I was about to open fire on U-88, as on the right of my airplane was a trace of bullets and shells. I went down. Just then I saw a Mi-109 pass over me. Dyachenko, targeting the bomber, did not have time to get out from under the blow of the suddenly appeared 4 Messerschmitts. His airplane broke the depth rudder control linkage. It is good that Lukashevich came to the rescue. He shot down the Messer and saved his comrade in arms. But Dyachenko's situation was, to put it bluntly, catastrophic. I saw how his MiG went into a dive, and Dyachenko still did not jump out of the cockpit. The ground was approaching, there was no parachutist. Jump. Dyachenko, jump, I shouted, even though I knew he would not hear me. Dyachenko, in these difficult conditions, did not lose composure, acted trimmer depth rudder. Already at the very ground, his plane sharply came out of dive and slowly turned in the direction of the Myaki airfield. Lukashevich caught up with him and accompanied him, ready, if necessary, to repel enemy fighters. We knew their habit to finish wounded aircraft. While these events were taking place, the bombers, followed by a trio of Mi-109s, turned around and went west. It was good that Messers did not continue the fight, for the situation for us was clearly unfavorable. In the evening it became clear why Dyachenko could not leave the plane. He did not have the strength to throw back the sliding part of the cockpit lantern, and what a big guy he was. However, with the help of trimmer, managed to take the plane out of dive. Everything ended with only damage to the propeller of the airplane, if not to count the depth rudder control rod broken by the shell. This case revealed a design defect in the cockpit lantern. It turned out that at speeds of more than 400 kilometers per hour, the cockpit cannot be opened. After that, at the request of the pilot's engineers, removed the movable part of the lantern, although it somewhat reduced the maximum speed of the MiG-3. Yesterday, returning in the evening to Myaki, our unit on its own initiative wrapped up behind Balti and conducted an air battle with Henschels. Late this afternoon, the regiment commander assigned us the task for the last sortie by the group to attack the enemy on the road Ungeni-Balti. After that, we could return to Myaki. Everything was clear. But just before the flight, Ivanov came to my airplane and gave me an additional order from the compound headquarters. After this flight, the group should land here, in Sinsuri, refuel with fuel and ammunition, and then fly to Myaki. During the flight, you are ordered to go behind Balti, find enemy planes or ground targets and destroy them. Comrade Commander, I said, you can't do that today. There is a powerful thunderstorm activity all around, including in Miyake. Darkness will come earlier for about 30 minutes. We will not have time to land at dusk. We'll have to land at night. Many pilots of the group did not fly at night. In such conditions there may be losses. Please call Osipenko and explain all this. Ivanov went to the command post and tried to clarify the task. However, nothing came out of it. Regimental commander handed me a categorical instruction from the commander to precisely fulfill his order. Act reasonably, advised Ivanov. As it turns out, Comrade Commander, there are no guarantees here. Having successfully carried out the assault, we landed in Sinsirai, refueled and flew out 5. At the approach to Balti, a black thunderstorm wall stood before us. Lightning flashed frequently. The edges of the clouds were lost on the left at the Prut and on the right at the Dniester. It was impossible to bypass the stormy area. We had to go straight through it. In flight, I suddenly remembered a case before the war. EP-5 tried to land on our airfield in a thunderstorm. A lightning struck it in a circle before landing, and a ball of fire, instead of an airplane, fell to the ground. I involuntarily imagined that someone from our group would also crash into the ground with a fiery comet. If I turned around and did not go after Balti, I would be accused of cowardice. I'd rather die than be labelled as such. That's right. Before the flight, I ordered the pilots, in case the group entered the clouds, to turn around beforehand and strictly maintain the course, according to the compass. At my command, the airplanes increased the intervals and entered the clouds. It was an absolute hell. The airplane was tossed from side to side, lightning flashed, cutting through the gloomy darkness with flashes. I realized that the main thing now was to keep the course accurately. Minutes passed. It began to lighten up ahead. Suddenly we emerged from the black clouds. That's it, we're through. I looked to the right and left. Fijichev's Link and my wingman Greatchev are unharmed, all alive. I felt cheerful at once. And now we have to keep our eyes open to look for the enemy. There were no enemy planes. Apparently the German command did not dare to take risks at this evening hour. Soon we found artillery batteries. They were preparing positions, fired artillerymen, cannons and howitzers, as well as standing nearby tractor-trailers. Now the course to their airfield. Again we are stabbed in pitch blackness. But this test is over. We set a course for Miyake. With every minute of flight it is getting darker and darker. The settlements on the ground are hardly visible. We must not lose our bearings. When crossing the Dniester by the familiar bends of the river, I determined that we had dodged to the south, although the compass kept the course accurately. It was dark below, and the population was keeping a light disguise. In these conditions it is difficult to find characteristic landmarks and make corrections to the route. I realized that in the darkness we can skip the lighthouses. I decided to go straight to the intersection with the railroad Odessa-Kotovsk and there, along it to the north. However, my plans were almost confused by Fijichov, who was walking to the left. Suddenly he turned abruptly, with a decline to the left. He was followed by his wingmen. They were poorly visible against the dark background of the ground. I directed the MiG in this direction, but the link has already disappeared in the darkness. It was useless to search the area, and there was no time for that. I decided to fly as planned. Our pair precisely kept the course and went to Kotovsk. From there we could already see rockets taking off from the Miyake airfield. After landing I asked the technician Vatnenko, who ran up, "Did Fijichev's wing land?" "No." Night darkness covered the airfield. It was useless to wait for pilots. Upset, with heavy thoughts, I went to the command post. What about them? Well, if they landed on some neighbouring airfield, but if on the field, then it could end in a disaster or breakdown of airplanes. Violation of flight discipline in flight angered me. Fijichov is a squadron commander. How could he do that? He risked the safety of his subordinates, put in a difficult situation Squadron. After hearing my report, Ivanov gave the command to the officers of the headquarters to call the nearest airfields and suggested, Let's go to the canteen. By morning everything will be clearer. Now you will be easier. Sokolov arrived from the course. And you'll go to your duties, you'll be his deputy. How happy this message made me. Anatoly Sokolov is an experienced squadron commander. Even the division command considers him, not like me, acting. It's a pity that by the time he returned from the course, we gave him so much trouble. In the dining room gathered all the flying staff, only from our squadron pilots were few. Seeing me, Sokolov came up and, smiling, said hello. Are you not happy about my arrival in the regiment? Why so upset? He asked. Here your arrival is only one joy, and is among a pile of troubles. What happened? Oh, it's a long story. Today is a day of total failure in the squadron. It's Black Friday. I briefly outlined today's events and told you about the breakup with Fijichev's group. Don't worry. Things happen in war. We'll find a link, and it's not hard to repair airplane propellers. Tomorrow there will be something to fight on. Stepan Nazarov, the commander of the 3rd Squadron, passed by the table. He stopped, warmly greeted Sokolov, then nodded at the table and said with a grin. Situation. 2 commanders of 1 squadron are quietly refueling, and the pilots, poor guys, are sitting somewhere near their broken planes. Listen, Stepan. Stop teasing. Ahead of me, Sokolov interrupted him. I was only joking. War is not a comedy. This is Semyonov's place. And he was killed in action today, I added. Please excuse me. I knew nothing about Semenov. Soon Nazarov withdrew. We talked to Sokolov. Hello, comrade senior lieutenant, came the voices of Dyachenko and Lukashevich. We congratulate you on the completion of the course and your return to the regiment. Hello. Glad to see you. Sit down at the table. Sokolov offered in a friendly manner. I ran away from the course. Everyone's at war, and we're studying the methodology of flight work organization. Is Pankratov back too? I inquired. No. He was left as an instructor of flight training courses. It's a pity. He is so needed here now. A healthy guy and a great pilot, I said regretfully. At that moment I could not foresee that in a few days my second closest friend, Pankratov, would crash on Ut-1, corkscrewing on landing. Then I turned to Dyachenko. You almost made me stutter. I was yelling at you to jump. I almost tore my voice. What happened to you? Just horror. When we hit a bomber, I saw you guys go back on the attack. So I followed you. Just as I took aim, I heard explosions in the tail of my MiG. I dived to the left and saw Lukashevich hit the cockpit of the Messer that attacked me. I took the control knob on myself, but it dangled in vain like a dog's tail. I decided to jump, but the lantern does not open. The ground is getting closer. Well, I think, Lenya, it's the end for you. We'll kiss the ground one last time and then we'll be done for good. But then I remembered about the depth rudder trimmer. I turned it on myself. MiG came out of dive over the ground. I don't realize whether I'm over Moldavia or in the other world. I can't decide whether to cry or laugh. Well, how did you manage to land with a broken control? Sokolov, who listened attentively to Dyachenko, asked, why did not leave the plane? I felt sorry. What kind of fighter without an airplane? Trimmer brought the MiG to a landing and landed. Only pity I made horns out of the propeller. That's how Dyachenko finished his story in a joking way. But it took a great deal of will, courage, skill to land a combat vehicle in such a difficult situation. This is heroism. And you inspired me with your story about the lantern, I said. The sliding part of it has a frame of steel tubes. Yesterday in the battle I blew it off, and today I flew without it. And that, I think, affected the deviation of the compass. That's why apparently when flying to Miyake compass took us to the right, I suggested about deviation from the route during the flight. It's possible. Tomorrow morning I'll scroll your plane and eliminate the deviation. The navigator of the regiment, Pal Palik Kryukov, confirmed my guess. It's a small thing. and whether we have time to replace the propellers on 3 airplanes before morning. What else will Fidjichov give us? I said bitterly. Today, in honor of your return, broke wood. Do not worry. Technicians will repair the machines quickly, Sokolov reassured me. Well, let's go on vacation. With the squadron commander, we went to the dormitory. I asked Sokolov permission to test the cabin lantern. I was seriously concerned about the case with Dyachenko. Sokolov approved my proposal. Good. You tomorrow continue to lead the squadron, and I will familiarize myself with its affairs. Feeling that now I will not be able to sleep well, I decided to go to the command post and learn about the fate of the Link Fidjiv. Inquiries to the nearest airfields did not give positive results. I couldn't sleep for a long time, and as soon as I dozed off I was up. In the morning, Sokolov heard my report on the state of affairs in the unit, on combat activity since the beginning of the war, on the causes of death of flight and technical staff. After that he talked to each pilot, engineer of the unit. And I, using my free time, performed a flight to test the aircraft lantern. The test confirmed the fears of Dyachenko. I reported it, and Sokolov and I went to the regiment commander. After yesterday's incident with Dyachenko, Pokrishkin tried to open the lantern in flight. At a speed of more than 400 kilometers, the lantern with great difficulty slides behind the back of the seat and put on the locks. At about 500 kilometers, and more, the pilot is unable to move it from the forward position, Sokolov reported to the regiment commander. Yes, a serious defect. And what are we going to do? Ivanov asked uncertainly. We need to check again. If confirmed, then all aircraft will have to remove the sliding part of the lantern, fly without it, said Sokolov. I see that Viktor Petrovich is thinking. I understand that it's not easy for a unit commander to take such a decision. Comrade Regiment Commander, the pilots will be trapped if the airplane is damaged. They will not be able to leave the diving or burning machine at high speed. This will have a negative psychological effect and will affect the combat activity. I firmly believe it is necessary to remove the sliding part of the lantern and fly without it, I supported Sokolov. But this will reduce the maximum speed of flight, Mig thought aloud regimental commander, realizing what responsibility he takes on himself, supporting these proposals. Speed will be reduced slightly, but the pilots will retain the guarantee to leave the plane in critical cases. And that's more important. All right, I'll consult with the engineers, fly the plane myself, and then give instructions. Defects must be reported to the factory immediately. A few hours later, the technicians removed the sliding part of the lantern from the cars. This subsequently saved the lives of many pilots. By lunchtime came the message that Fidjichov's squadron made an emergency landing on the flight deck under construction. The pilots landed safely near Kotovsk. Only one machine was slightly damaged. They immediately went to the Makar with technical staff and gasoline refueler. The whole squadron looked hopefully in the direction of Kotovsk, waiting for the arrival of the Link, and it was as if a huge weight had been lifted off me. 3 airplanes appeared from the southeast. When approaching the airfield, we saw UT-4, escorted by 2 Seagulls, was flying. We realized that the division commander had flown in with Inspector Sorokin, acting as chief pilot. He called the squadron on the phone and summoned me to the command post. I went and thought some special assignment or to talk to the division commander. I felt no personal guilt for yesterday's day. At the command post stood with a clearly dissatisfied look Osipenko. Next to him Ivanov. No sooner had I reported on my arrival, as the commander of the compound with irritation asked, "Where is your squadron?" From the question I was even a little taken aback. "What are you silent? Why lost the group?" 6 airplanes ready to fulfill the combat mission. Fidjichov's squadron is already landing. I nodded toward the strip. In half an hour it will also be ready to perform the task. Pilot Semyonov died yesterday in an air battle. Why did you lose your group yesterday? The group fell apart when returning from a mission at night. In these conditions, Fidjichov's wing broke away and, not finding its airfield in the darkness, landed involuntarily. I tried to explain the situation. What night? Ivanov. What's he saying? He's confusing twilight with night. With thunderclouds, darkness comes almost half an hour earlier. Every pilot and meteorologist knows it well. When we were ordered to fly the mission, this was not taken into account, I replied, trying to deflect the blow from Ivanov. You know that. And don't you remember how our Su-2 was shot down? That was my fault. But for this misdemeanor I had already paid for it with 6 downed enemy planes. The conversation went on, as they say, on and on. I did not hold back, talked about the unwise use of fighters, the dispersal of forces, caused censure of the commander of the compound. Ivanov. Squadron, he cannot be trusted. Prepare an order to remove him from the commander, concluded Osipenko. He is the deputy. Until Sokolov's return was acting as commander, explained Ivanov. And from the deputy must be removed. Demote him to squad leader. Let him first learn to manage the link. Feeling that in irritation I got cocky, asked permission to go. Osipenko waved at me and went to the command post. And I hurried to the squadron. Well, how did we talk? Sokolov asked me on my return. This conversation will remain in my memory for a long time. How did the conversation end? Osipenko remained commander of the division, and I became a squadron commander. Why did you argue? I wanted to tell the truth. I'd like to go to battle now. You can't fight with such a mood. Anger leads to rash actions. We must calm down, Sokolov advised. Just at this time the squadron commander approached Fidjichov, reported on the arrival. Sokolov interrupted him and strictly asked, why from the leading pair left? And where did he lead us? Fidjichov nodded in my direction. I landed at my airfield. And where did you go with your link? And why did you land in the field, forced? I asked with irritation. Comrade Fidjichov, that it was the last time. Warned Sokolov, on Kolkin-Gol for such actions were put on trial. You are saved only by the fact that the unauthorized act was without a serious flying accident, warned Sokolov. A guilty expression appeared on Fidjichov's swarthy face. Even the sideburns on his cheeks lowered. Apparently only now he began to realize what he had done. Sokolov's words frightened him. Do you understand? The commissar raised his voice. Understood, comrade senior lieutenant. Go and prepare the formation for the flight. Sokolov and I silently considered the situation. Now we'll get a combat mission. It was not clear who will lead the unit into battle. Sokolov is still familiarizing himself with the cases, and today, to lead the group is not ready. I understood the reason for the dislike of the division commander. It was caused by my decisions on the implementation of assaults by the full squadron. In the early period of the war, a serious test, battle test, was subjected to all pre-war tactics of aviation. Unfortunately, not all commanders, especially in our unit, were able to critically evaluate the experience of the first battles, to adopt the best, to make the proper conclusions. The abundance of tasks that were set before the aviation units, the inability to choose the main direction of the strike, to take responsibility gave birth to the dispersion of forces and means, led to unnecessary losses, to low efficiency. But they realized it not immediately. It turned out that the leadership of the division, in which we were then, did not participate in combat operations, did not rely on the opinion of those who directly fought with the air and ground enemy. I was reassured only by the fact that during those difficult days we managed to inflict serious damage to the enemy to some extent, preserving the personnel and equipment of the unit. From these first battles we learned a lot, gained not only combat experience, the conviction in the need to be more decisive and bold in a new way to build maneuver, tactics. In the difficult conditions of intense battles grew the consciousness of high responsibility of each commander and fighter for the outcome of the battle. Of course, at that moment much was still unclear, had not received a conscious and deep thoughtful decision. Approach to the new was born in a critical assessment of existing shortcomings, and this was very important in the formation of combat pilots. Cognition of themselves in combat was just beginning, was passing, if I may say so, the initial stage. That day our squadron, as well as the whole unit, stormed the enemy columns on the roads. The enemy was advancing on Kishinev and Balti. The Soviet troops were slowly retreating with heavy fighting. They sought to hold these largest cities of Moldavia, with the loss of which the roads to the Dniester were opened. Platoons had already made 2 sorties for assaults. I was not allowed to go on combat missions. I patiently waited for the commander's decision, realizing that it was not accidental. In the second sortie was shot down by the link commander Vitaly Dmitriev. Having thrown himself out of the burning airplane, he parachuted down to the enemy location. Soon I was urgently summoned to the command post by Matveev, the regiment's chief of staff. "That's it, Pokrishkin. You have a responsible task to determine exactly where our troops are now defending in the areas of Kishinev and Balti." "I see. Give at least approximately the front line in these areas," I asked. "You what? Nobody knows it now. Here you are ordered to determine it. Take the wingman of Dmitriev's link and carry out the mission. Do you know that Dmitriev was shot down?" "I know. If we fly individual assault missions, we'll lose a lot of men." The task was not an easy one, but I was glad to get back into the combat work full of surprises and risks. However, the composition of the established group made me think. Dmitriev's wingmen, seeing with their own eyes his burning airplane and landing at the enemy, received a psychological shake. With such a mood, they now cannot engage in battle with the Messerschmitts, and on this section of the reconnaissance will certainly have to meet them. So it is necessary now to provide for all the measures. I calculated and decided to reconnoitre using altitude and flight speed. North of Balti, the group came out at an altitude of about 3,900 meters and immediately headed south. Such a height was not taken in vain. It is difficult for the enemy anti-aircraft gunners to hit us. Large-caliber anti-aircraft guns are well aimed at 3,500–4,000 meters, at round figures. Inspecting from the height of a large space, on the fires, dust on the roads, and on the ruptures of artillery shells determined the line on which our troops were defending. But it was still an estimate. It was necessary to specify a number of details. Behind Kishinev, using the altitude, we from the side of the sun went into a steep descent and accelerated high speed. During the descent, on a crossing course, below us, met 4 Messerschmitts. They, thinking that we were attacking them, panicked. And when they calmed down and decided to fight, our small group was already far from them. Whizzing by the ground, along the line of defence, we examined the situation in detail. Before leaving for Mayaki, again gained altitude, and having spiked once again past west of Sinchari. I was concerned about the fate of our commandant's office. It is located in this settlement. We returned to the airfield. I reported in detail to the regiment commander VP. Ivanov the situation at the front. The enemy cut into the defence southeast of Balti. Apparently seeks to cut the road to Chisinau. Now his large columns are 10 kilometers from Singeri. We must immediately remove our commandant's office from there. It's clear. Matveev. He turned to the chief of staff. Report to the division the results of the reconnaissance. The regiment commander once again examined the map, on which they drew the line of contact with the enemy, his columns on the roads. Send out 2 units in succession to attack the enemy in the area of Sinsari, he instructed. And what should I do next? The main task for you is reconnaissance, Ivanov replied. Comrade Regiment Commander, I am a fighter pilot. I want to fight in the air and storm the enemy on the ground. Don't be in a hurry. Everything will happen. And the reconnaissance and the battle. At the parking lot, Sokolov told me about the new arrangement of planes in the squadron. He decided Selivostov's and Fidjichev's squads should consist of 3 airplanes each, and mine and his of pairs. In my pair of permanent wingmen was appointed Dyachenko. Sokolov took Lukashevich as wingman in his pair. It was a reasonable decision. It lifted my spirits. I will not hide. After the conversation with Ivanov, I came out quite depressed. My heart wanted to fight, and in the course of reconnaissance it was necessary to avoid fights most of the time. And now get ready to fly my wingman, ordered Sokolov. Selavostov's squadron had already left for Singseria for an assault. To replace them, we'll fly 5. I don't know Sincherea, but you'll help me find it. Yes, comrade commander, I shouted, happy to participate in real combat work. Having finished the assault, the group passed over our airfield. There our rifle units were already preparing defensive positions. We landed at sunset. Gathered at Sokolov's plain, we shared impressions of the combat day, and then came a tarataika with sandwiches and dry Moldavian wine. In the last days there was such intense combat work that there was no time to have lunch. The commander of the Airfield Service Battalion organized the delivery of tea and sandwiches directly to the aircraft. Fidjichov, who, like me, was flying in Sokolov's group, poured a mug of wine. Sasha, stop being angry. Let's have a snack. It's still a long way to dinner, he suggested. I don't feel like it. To the company. It's late, and we won't have to fly out. Come on. A sip wouldn't hurt, I agreed. But we didn't have time to eat. An Emka with a staff officer drove up. He gave the order to fly a group to cover the Ribnitsa bridge across the Dniester. On it, according to the received data, a group of enemy bombers is coming. In one fell swoop, we were in the airplanes. We took off, barraged over the bridge until deep dusk. There were no bombers. We set a course for home. Soon we spotted a Junkers just above. It was a single long-range Scout U-88. He was going west with a decrease. The group immediately turned to his tail and attacked. I was closest to the Junkers. I hit the top gunner with a shot and started to get closer to hit the engines from a short distance. Suddenly, past the wing of my airplane, there was a trace to the enemy scout. I looked to the left. Fidjichov was shooting. He walked behind and to the side of my plane and was firing past me at the bomber. It may hit my plane, and even worse, we will collide, flashed a thought. I decided not to interfere with Fidjichov and ducked under the Junkers, immediately made a slide, took aim at the cockpit pilots and the lower gunner. But the enemy gunner was ahead of me. His line precisely hit the canopy of the lantern of my plane. Some pieces flew sideways. In the face hit a powerful airstream. In the same second, almost machine control knob and foot, I gave sharply to the right and left from under the trace of fire. There was no plexiglass in the cockpit visor, only the metal frame remained. Neither was the collimator sight mounted under the visor. There was nothing to aim at. The oncoming air was hitting my face. The only thing left was to go to the airfield. I immediately broke away from Fidjichov's pair and went down. At the parking lot met Vakhnenko. He examined the airplane carefully, thought, once again examined the cockpit. Lucky you, Commander. The bullet hit right in the sighting light. If it had been off by 2 centimeters in any direction, you would have been killed. You weren't even hit. Surprisingly, not a scratch, I replied. Troubled you tonight. By morning the plane will be ready. Fidjichov and his wingman sat down and came up to me. What happened? Why did you leave? I showed my hand on the airplane lantern. The pilots examined the damage. What a mess you've had. You know why. Don't get so close. It could have been worse, said Fidjichov. That's not the point. You have to attack one target in succession, not one after another. And the glass of wine played its part. It slowed my reaction time. I realized that Fidjichov is now happy about the luck of the link. He would not understand my arguments. Translated the conversation. Junkers shot down. In the air began to burn. Congratulations to your link with the victory. Shook hands, and then jumped on the wing of the MiG and began to scrutinize the damage in the cockpit once again. In the morning I flew again in a pair with Leonid Dyachenko on reconnaissance in the area of Balti. The city was already captured by the enemy. On the road from the direction of Floresti, convoys and artillery were drawn into it. To hit them in the afternoon, the division sent 9 SB accompanied by our 7 MiG. Oh, and it was painful to fly at low speed on MiGs, guarding outdated in its speed data bombers. But such a combat order was established by pre-war instructions. Now he did not provide us with the ability to fight on vertical maneuvers in case of attack by enemy fighters. The bombers acted boldly and daringly. They accurately hit the target, inflicted considerable damage to the enemy. They worked skillfully. When returning home, we were overtaken by a group of Messerschmitts. They came higher and, descending, quickly approached our group. We had to act vigorously. Do not let them be the first to strike. Jumping out in front of Sokolov, rocking MiG, I warned the group commander about the appearance of the enemy. With a combat turn, went towards the Messerschmitts. Frontal attack of my MiG-8 Me-109 did not take. Leaping past, they rushed to the bombers. Vigorously turned around with the engine afterburner on. I rushed after the Messers. One pair of Me-109s, separated from their group, aimed at a lagging SB, which apparently was damaged by anti-aircraft over Balti. I rushed to his aid. The leader of the pair of Me-109s opened fire. A few seconds late, I hit him with my Q. The downed Messerschmitt collapsed on the wing, went into a dive and exploded on the ground. Our bomber went with a steep descent, leaving behind a jet of black smoke. Shot down. Didn't have time to help, I thought, and decided to escort the bombed SB going for a forced landing. At a height of 300 meters from the bomber burst out fire, and immediately near the plane opened 3 parachutes. I was glad that the whole crew was alive. Our group of MiGs, repelling the attacks of 6 Me-109 on horizontal maneuvers, the battle was unsuccessful. Messerschmitt shot down the bomber, hit the plane of our pilot Stepan Komleva. Wounded, he ejected with a parachute. Early in the morning, from the division received the task to scout the crossings across the Prut. It was not easy. The crossings were located in the deep rear of the advancing enemy. Fidjichov and his wingman Lukashevich were assigned to carry out the reconnaissance. We, with Dyachenko, had to cover his pair from a possible attack of enemy fighters. But it turned out that my wingman could not start the engine. We flew 3 of us. Thus, when attacked by Messerschmitts, I alone had to restrain them in combat and protect Fidjichev's pair. From the very beginning of the war, I, like some other pilots, was a supporter of not a trio, but a pair. It better provides maneuver in aerial combat. Now I was flying solo, covering the pair. Maneuver, of course, provided, but help in a difficult situation to wait for no one. The flight to reconnaissance of the crossing to Ungaini, in the heat of anti-aircraft fire, was not easy. We also knew that enemy fighters were based at Iasi airfield, and this is close to the crossings. However, we had to fulfill the combat mission accurately even in this situation. We understood its importance. We crossed the Dniester and came north of Orhai. Small enemy columns of vehicles and artillery were moving along the highway in the direction of Kishinev. Fidjichov, followed by Lukashevich, started shelling them. In vain they storm, I thought. They may be left without ammunition if they have to take the battle. Soon our group reached the Prut about 70 kilometers north of Ungaina. Above the river, Fidjichov's pair turned south and flew along the river valley at low altitude. I was surprised at this decision. We would not be able to suddenly appear in the area of crossings. In the river valley, anti-aircraft gunners will easily detect us and meet us with organized fire. And so it happened. At the approach to the crossings ahead of us, and on both sides, stretched trails. Fidjichov's pair immediately descended to the water itself. I realized that in order to get out from under this powerful and dense fire, it was necessary to switch from low flight altitude to extremely low altitude. I dived down under the tracks, pressed against the water, almost clinging to it with the propeller. Due to the decrease, I overtook Fidjichev's pair and was to the left of it. At that time, Lukashevich saw a high bank with trees ahead of him. Suddenly, he switched to the left bearing and was only a few meters away from me. In order not to collide, I pulled the plane up 30 meters and let it pass under me. In these seconds, I heard 3 explosions of anti-aircraft shells. They hit the engine. I gave the control stick away from me and barely managed to level the plane at the water. Immediately began interruptions in the engine, shaking of the airplane. Water and oil splashes appeared on the lantern visor. That's it. Hit. Now the airplane will fall into the Prut. However, the engine, although with interruptions, but pulled over the riverbed. Soon the crossings and anti-aircraft tracks were left behind. Ahead of me at low altitude removed a pair of Fidjichev. With difficulty gaining 70 meters of altitude, I followed them. I was sure that Fidjichev, seeing that I was lagging behind, would turn around. This is what a group commander should do according to unwritten laws. But the pair continued their flight, getting farther and farther away. Now even the lousiest messer could kill my plane with a short burst. The feeling of loneliness, danger for a moment restrained me. But I quickly coped with it and began to think how to proceed. I realized that the engine would not last long and I would have to land somewhere with retracted landing gear. I had to pull as close to the front line as possible so that I could get to my people in time, at least to pass the Dniester. If I don't make it in time, I won't be able to cross this powerful river in the midst of enemy troops. The shortest way to our troops is straight to the east. I'm turning the plane around with a slight roll. But ahead of me and to the left are columns of smoke. It's burning Kishinev. You can't go that way, there's still fighting for the city. There must be a lot of anti-aircraft guns, and in the air Messerschmitts. They'll kill us. I set a course to the southeast, bypassing Kishinev. As I know, Romanian troops are advancing here. The airplane is flying at low speed, the engine is working with interruptions, and on the fuselage on the left side there are streams of oil and water stretching to the tail. The instrument arrows show the maximum temperature. Soon the engine stops, and below me there are forested hills and not a single clearing. I look carefully, looking for a place to land with retracted landing gear. A large valley with a river appeared in the distance. I decide to land there. I need to protect myself. I shifted my goggles to my forehead so that the glasses would not damage my eyes. I tightened the harness straps. The oil and water temperature gauges went from maximum to 0. That's it. The engine's going to jam. With difficulty I pass over the hill into the valley and carefully turn the airplane along it. And I see a long column of enemy vehicles and guns moving along the road. Immediately I realize that this was the highway from Kushi to Kishinev. They say that in mortal danger, if you do not lose your cool, the only right decision is born. That's what happened in this case. I realized that it was necessary to pull over the column and the river, over a forested hill, only there my salvation. More with the rudder of the turn than with the roll of the airplane, I turn across the road and the river. Luckily for me, the engine is already on its last breath, pulling the airplane across the valley. Above the hill I heard a sharp scraping and blows something burst in the motor. But even in these moments my brain worked clearly, my hands acted confidently. I turned off the ignition to prevent a fire on impact with the ground. Through the control knob, resting my hands on the dashboard, I tensed up. The fighter plummets into the woods. The impact. And I blacked out. I woke up. I feel I'm alive. My first thought is, where are the Germans? Instantly I freed myself from the straps of the parachute. Overcoming the searing pain in my leg, with difficulty I get out of the cabin and load my pistol. There will be no choice here, it is better to shoot myself than to be captured. I examine the gun, and I listen. The morning silence was broken only by birdsong and the distant rumbling of cars under the hill. I have 2 magazines of cartridges. Life must be given more dearly, and now I must get out of here. With regret and gratitude I looked at the wrecked warplane. Wings and the rear half of the fuselage were lying on the sides. MiG faithfully served me since the beginning of the war. And now he took the blow on himself, saved my life. Goodbye, my battle buddy. By the sun and watches determining the direction, all day long I was sneaking eastward through the forest, cornfields and vineyards to the Dniester. I had to get there before the enemy created a solid front line. Night came. My leg was sore, but it was possible to move. I took a short respite. Then I looked up at the sky, found Polaris. I oriented myself and set off. It was past midnight when I reached the trail. It led me along the high bank of the rivulet. Suddenly I saw a silhouette of a man ahead of me. At the same second I stumbled and fell under the cliff on my injured leg. In a rage of pain, forgetting about caution, I headed towards the silhouette with a gun in my hand. It turned out that he had mistaken the crucifixion of Christ for a man. It's not uncommon in those places, and it became even more difficult to walk. Every step gave a sharp pain. I had to find some kind of transportation. I wouldn't get far with this injury. And the morning had already begun. Slowly walking, I scrutinized the area. I see a man up ahead. I could tell from the patched clothes that he was a poor man. He won't give me away. I headed towards him. I could see a village not far away. I approached the peasant. "How do you do?" "Hello." And he looks at me with fear. "Don't be afraid. I'm a Soviet pilot. Are there any Germans in the village?" "No." "Are there any of the leaders of the village council?" "No one." "It's been a week since they left. Can you show me where the village council was located?" The Moldavanin showed me a house under a red iron roof, clearly visible from the hill where we were. Then I saw that not far away, in the grass, sat a girl, the daughter of a peasant. She bravely got up and brought a bag with food. I hadn't eaten anything for 24 hours. Cornbread and wild pears seemed unusually tasty to me. With difficulty I reached the former village council. Several men were sitting on a stake near the house. They were talking. When they saw me, they fell silent. I said hello and asked them to take me to the railroad station. They started talking at once, saying that it was dangerous, and there were no horses. I had to remind them that it was wartime, and that I was not travelling on personal business. They found a couple of horses and a taratayka. Only in the evening the Moldavian and I arrived at the station of Canary. But the railroaders serving it had left for the rear 5 days ago. It's deserted. What to do? Where to go next? I looked bitterly at the charred ruins of the station. A poorly dressed old man came up to me. "Where did the pilot come from?" he asked. We got to talking. "This morning I heard the horn of a locomotive behind that hill. That's where the railroad runs. Go there," he advised me. It was already dark when we arrived at the Kashani station. There were platforms and a locomotive on the tracks. Who is there? Ours or the enemy? It was difficult to see in the twilight. I decided to take a risk and drive up to the station. It turned out that our soldiers were at the station. The commander of the unit looked at me with surprise when I introduced myself to him. I briefly told him about my journey. "How did you get through?" "There is a forest by the road, where we had just fought with the Romanians," he shook his head. "And all my worries are gone like a wave of a hand. I'm among my own. And it doesn't matter at all that there was a battle and tomorrow morning the last echelon leaves on this road. It didn't interest me at all now. I ate my porridge with appetite and drank it with water. Then, forgetting everything, I fell asleep. Only on the 4th day after the flight to Ungeni I returned to my regiment. I was already considered dead there. They even wrote in the logbook missing in action. The pilots and technicians took some of my things as a memento. This order arose spontaneously, and not only in our flying unit. I went straight to the command post. I told Ivanov about my experiences. It was felt that the regiment commander was sincerely and deeply pleased with my return. "Now, Pokrishkin, do not worry about anything. Treat and rest," he advised. In the squadron my appearance pleased all pilots and technicians, and Fidjichov even began to justify himself. "I and Lukashevich flew again to the area of Ungeni, looking for you," he said. "Valia, if you had shown concern and looked back in time, you should not have flown out to look for me," I told him in my heart, and not wanting to aggravate our relationship, went to Sokolov's plane. And then I still had to go to the sanitary unit. My leg was swollen, strained in the ordeal, and it was giving out a deafening pain. In fact, by the evening I could not walk. I lay in the ward, again and again returning mentally to the past days. I listened to the rumble of airplanes, holding back impatience. I wanted to get up and hurry to the parking lot. On the 2nd day at lunchtime the door to the ward opened. I see the regiment Commissar G.E. Chupakov coming in. "Well, are you lying down, Stalin's falcon?" he said from the threshold. "Tell me how you flew." briefly told Grigory Efimovich the story of the flight, everything as it was. "We should have given gas, pulling away to their own," says Chupakov. "I couldn't, the engine wasn't pulling. And how was it at the front? I didn't see any newspapers while I was sneaking to the regiment." There is a lot of new information. I brought you the material with Joseph Stalin's speech. He addressed the nation on the radio the day you were shot down. The commissar, having handed me the materials, was in no hurry to leave. He sat silently while I impatiently looked through the speech of the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks. "You leave it? I'll read it carefully." "Of course. Here are the answers to many questions that bother everyone." The commissar went to the other chambers, and I once again, now carefully, read the speech of Stalin. The tone of the address to the people, tasks, assessments, everything was important to me. And when I put the material aside, the first and foremost thought that arose in my mind was addressed to myself: what should I personally do to fulfill the instructions of the party to strengthen the repulse of the enemy? Chupakov came in an hour later. I read the question in his gaze. "I understand everything, Comrade Commissar. It's no time for me to lie down. I must go to the squadron." The commissar grinned. He must have noticed a stick at the head of the bunk, on which I leaned when I went to the sanitary unit. "Lie down, you have one task to get better quickly. But you need to reflect on the results of the battles. I feel we'll be fighting for a long time. It's not easy to win over such a dangerous enemy. We must fight bravely, smartly, competently." There was a temporary break in my combat activity. I couldn't fly now. It was necessary to heal and rest. I was very weak for these days and could not withstand the flight overloads. However, it was not in my character to stare aimlessly at the ceiling. I decided to use my free time to analyze the past period of combat activity. The need for this had arisen before, but the combat work from early morning until late evening did not give such an opportunity. Now there was nothing to prevent such an analysis. The habit to reflect and think over my actions was developed in the years when I worked as a toolmaker at the SIB Combine plant. This quality was brought up in me by the head of the tool shop, an excellent master, a magician of his work. It used to happen that you would bring a complicated tool or pattern to him for delivery and wait for a decision. I remember once he scrutinized my product, measured it, and then he said in a fatherly way, "You're accurate, but you can't see the soul in the mold. What kind of soul can there be in metal?" That's right. Metal has no soul. But you must have a soul in your work. You have to make the tool so that it would be a pleasure for you and those who will use your tool, so that they would be afraid to touch the mold with dirty hands and would not throw it on the workbench, but gently put it in a velvet case. But then 2 weeks won't be enough to make it, I tried to justify myself. A week is enough if you think about a reasonable order of work. His exacting nature instilled in me precision in my work, the desire to reflect on my actions. This habit was also reflected in the mastering of flying. I think that it was this quality allowed me to graduate from Krasnodar Aero Club, to master in a short time to fly a fighter, to learn how to pilot it. And now, forced to be suspended from flying, I thought over my small combat experience, made conclusions for the future. What bothered me first of all? Why, along with victories, I often arrive at the airfield with holes in the airplane, and from the last sortie came on foot. After all, I know piloting techniques and weapons normally. No one reproached me for timidity. The combat fighter is not bad either. What is the reason for failures? And I began to think about it self-critically, without discounts. Unfortunately, there were many mistakes. Mainly the unsuccessful actions in the battle were due to my mistakes, as well as due to the blunders of other pilots who were in the same group with me on a combat mission. At the same time, there were many reasons that occurred through no fault of the flight crew. They occurred due to shortcomings in the construction of the combat order, because of the fact that not made the right conclusions from the first battles with the enemy. And battles in the air showed that many of the techniques of combat operations, which we mastered in the pre-war period, forms of building a combat order outdated, do not correspond to the practice of today, do not work to win. The defeat of my airplane over the crossing in Ungani by an anti-aircraft gun made me even more convinced that a group of 3 airplanes is not suitable for fighters. It constrains the maneuver not only of the leader, but also of the wingmen, does not ensure their safety, can lead to a collision. When I found myself in the position of Fijichev's left wingman, Lukashevich's change of formation from the right to the left bearing almost ended in a collision between the planes. It was good that I saw Lukashevich coming from the side. Freedom of maneuver for the rearrangement of wingmen is provided only in the combat order of the pair. 3-plane formation is peculiar to bombers. It provides them with the defense of the rear sector, but it is not suitable for fighters as attackers. The combat order of a fighter group of 4 or more aircraft should be built with the dispersion of pairs along the front and height. In this formation achieves high maneuverability of the group. Pilots are less distracted by prudence to prevent collision with each other. Their main focus is on finding the enemy. There was another very serious reason that negatively affected our combat activity, the effectiveness of combat operations. This is the lack of radio communication on our fighters. Radio communication provides clear control in the air, allows you to warn pilots of danger. Due to the lack of radio on our fighters, we were forced to operate primitive evolutions of airplanes. In the first air battles affected and shortcomings in the tactical training of the pre-war period. The pilots developed skills to fly in dense combat formation, suitable only for parades. But this is exactly how to fly required instructions and manuals. In order to switch to open combat orders, it was necessary to change the psychological habits of the pilots. And this is not easy. Analysis of the conducted battles, their own and pilots of the squadron, suggested that attacks on air and ground targets must be conducted at high speed. This will ensure the suddenness of the blow, create a large angular velocity of movement in the firing of enemy fighters, gunners, bombers, and anti-aircraft gunners. Confirmation of this was my fight with 5 Mi-109s. By a high-speed attack I, having skipped the wingman of the 3, shot down the leading one and saved Semenov. I got damage to my airplane because I lost a few seconds watching the burning Messerschmitt. If I had not delayed after destroying the enemy's airplane and vigorously went up, I would not have come under fire. When attacking a U-88 Scout, my plane was seriously damaged because I attacked at the same speed as the Junkers. Then I was saved from death by the sight, which took the bullet on itself. In a similar position was Yakovlev in the Battle of Kotovsky. But then the bullet, having passed the sight, hit him in the face. Tried to think very carefully and our actions when flying together with bombers. The main reason of failures in escorting SB was low speed of fighters, and as a consequence of this fighting on horizontal maneuvers. The conclusion was the same: escorting bombers, especially obsolete designs, should be performed only at high speed. To obtain it, it is necessary to escort links and pairs of flight to make a serpentine flight above and behind the bombers, echeloned by height. In this case, pairs and links of fighters, according to my views, should build a snake towards each other for mutual cover. This is the scissors method of escorting. In those days I came to a conclusion. I had to put my thoughts on paper to think over schemes and proofs. Leaning on a stick, I went shopping in the village of Miyake. I bought soap, toothbrush and powder. And most importantly, a common school notebook. I also bought a miniature suitcase which could easily be placed behind the armoured back of the plane when flying to other airfields. And such a prospect was clearly looming in view of the retreat of our troops to the east. In a notebook I wrote a title: Tactics of Fighters in Battle. Then I began to write down my considerations and calculations, to make schemes. One late afternoon a group of pilots of the squadron came to me. They caught me with a notebook. They surrounded me, began to interrogate me with jokes. Especially tried Dyachenko. "Comrade Commander, tell me a secret. What are you writing all this?" I draw some conclusions from my combat experience. What is this? A new novel, War and Peace. Everyone laughed, and Nazarov even reproached me. You're a combat pilot, but you're writing. Have you decided to give up flying? No, I won't quit flying. But I'm thinking how to fight tactically competent. I've told you briefly about our shortcomings. And what are your conclusions? Stepan Nazarov questioned me persistently. Different ones, taking into account the circumstances of the battle and the task at hand. For example, such a question: you shot down an airplane and continue to fight. Should you watch where it falls? What do you think? You can't look, or you'll end up next to the downed enemy pilot. The pilots were quiet, thinking. Someone asked, "What about the report on the downed airplane?" The bosses will demand the exact place of the crash. If you want to be shot down, then look. Or another question. Is it better to fly in pairs or in links? Of course a link, said Fidjichav. 3 airplanes are stronger than 2. In quantitative terms, 3 planes are stronger, but in maneuverability. I parried. One of the most important requirements for fighters' high maneuverability of the group. We had an interesting conversation. Air fighters have not once participated in battles, analysed the actions. Of course, each of us drew different conclusions. Well, Sasha, compose. The war is just unfolding. To win, you have to be smart in battle. To think in the air, you have to prepare for it on the ground. I concluded. Combat requires thought, guys. Of course, analysing past battles occupied me, but my comrades were fighting, and I was sitting on the ground. Unable to endure, on the 3rd day after returning to the regiment, leaning on a stick, went to his squadron. Lately, however, I have not been much involved in the affairs of the unit. All the time I gave my link and flights to combat missions. Now, walking through the parking lot, with interest watched the work of technical staff, preparing pilots for the next flights. They met me in a friendly manner, with good wishes and sometimes with jokes. I can see why you came to the airfield with a stick, on broken landing gear, smiling, said Selavastov. You want the technicians to repair you. I'm tired of lying down. I want to fly. Are you going to fly with a crutch? Put those thoughts out of your mind and heal yourself. The Nazis are still advancing. But we'll still defeat them. I, Kuzma, can't let others fight the enemy for me. You'll have time to fight. Get better first. We're just about to take off on an assault mission. We'll pay off the anti-aircraft gunners and for you. I wished success to Selavastov's squadron and went on my way. On one of the empty parking lots, drew attention to the work of the weapons mechanic. On the wing elevator, he was attaching a BS machine gun, apparently taken from a wrecked airplane. What are you working on? I want to make an anti-aircraft machine gun in case of a raid on the airfield. You're going to shoot down messers with this homemade machine gun. What can I do? There aren't any anti-aircraft guns on the airfield. I can't calculate the sighting, or I'd have shot it today. I can help you with the calculations. Give me some paper and a pencil. You solve this problem. You see the enemy with your own eyes and know the theory of shooting. If we do it ourselves, we won't be able to do it soon. We should put the sight from the broken MiG, advised the mechanic, and promised to talk about this issue with the engineer of the regiment. I didn't believe in the mechanic's idea, but I wanted to support his good aspiration. I myself like to invent, always with respect for people looking for something new in technology. At one of the parking lots around the MiG with the hoods removed, a group of technical staff was bustling around. They always gathered in such a way that they could repair the airplane damaged in the battle faster. Kopylov led them. He had only recently been appointed chief engineer of the regiment instead of the dead Sholokovich. Seeing me, Kopylov exclaimed, "Here comes the master. We are preparing this airplane for you. We put a new engine, replaced the gas tank and fixed all the holes. Fly and shoot down the Krolts." I went around the plane. There were a lot of patches on its wings and fuselage. One thing I was glad about was the engine sent from the factory. When will the airplane be ready for flight? Soon. We'll start putting the cowls on now. Can you fly it with a sore leg? I can. When it's ready, let me know. I will. I walk through the parking lot and smell the airfield with pleasure. Everything seems familiar. Even the sharp taste of gasoline. Now, under the rays of the rising sun, it evaporates together with the dew and makes me want to get into the air sooner. Soon the airplane was ready for overflight. I carefully inspected it, especially checked the connections of rudders with control levers. I developed this habit in peacetime. I remember, because of incorrect connection of control cables with depth rudders, I almost crashed on a glider. I put my crutch aside, put on a parachute, and with the help of a technician climbed into the cockpit. The engine was running clean on all modes. He took off. He intended to go to the zone and there to test the engine and the airplane. But the overflight was disrupted. After takeoff, the landing gear did not lock. It was impossible to pilot in such a position. But I didn't go for landing right away. In the air, checked how the airplane obeyed the rudders on turns, only then sat down. The technicians quickly eliminated the malfunction, and it was possible to take off again for overflight. At this time arrived at the parking lot Squadron Commander Sokolov. He gathered the flight crew, set the task to attack the airfield in Balti, where the enemy air force was already based. With difficulty I managed to persuade Sokolov to take me in his group. The commander of the regiment Ivanov also agreed to this flight, if they had time to prepare my airplane. The hatred for the enemy, the desire to participate in the attack on the airfield in Balti, where on the first day of the war Komayev's technician and pilots Ovchinnikov and Surov were killed, deprived me of caution. I decided to fly on a virtually untravelled airplane. It was time for the flight. The group started the engines and turned to the start. My wingman and I waited for takeoff. The first link went into the air, followed by our turn. I give full throttle. The airplane runs down the runway. Seconds more, and it will get off the ground. Suddenly the engine cut off. There was silence. It was like a blow to the ears. And ahead is a log with a rivulet, where the airplane will surely scapitize. I clamped the wheel brakes, and, not letting the airplane turn around, stopped at the boundary of the airfield. The wingman, having taken off, is attached to the group. In bewilderment, I sit in the MiG and do not realize what happened. What happened? Why did the engine stop working? I ran my eyes over the instruments. There is gasoline. The ignition is on. The gasoline valve is turned on correctly. I see Ivanov pulling up in an MEMCA. He jumped up on the wing and asked, "Pokrishkin, what happened? Why did you stop taking off?" "I do not understand myself, Comrade Commander. Suddenly the engine cut off. Maybe I mixed up the gasoline valves and cut off the access to fuel." "No. The gasoline valves are turned on correctly." Ivanov looked at me and ordered, "Steer to the side. Quickly clear the landing strip." The commander spoke curtly. And it seemed to me that he thought badly about this case. I felt uncomfortable. The technicians came over. I saw in their eyes anxiety and doubt. They quickly pushed the plane with its tail forward into the corn. Soon Engineer Kopylov appeared. What happened? The engine stopped working. "Let me try." The engineer sat in the cockpit, started the engine, gave full throttle. The engine roared, ready to tear the airplane off the pads under the wheels. Kopylov gave me a thumbs up and turned off the ignition. He got out of the cockpit, came over. "Sasha, the engine works perfectly. Let me try it myself." I sat down in the cabin, and I was stared at with wary eyes. I started the engine and gave the throttle. The engine roared. Standing at the wing console, Kopylov grinned at me. I took off the throttle at low speed and again switched to maximum speed. Suddenly the engine cut off again. Kopylov immediately replaced me in the cockpit, but no matter how much I tried to start, the engine did not make a single revolution. We opened the center plane gas tank's fuel, as the technicians say, to the brim. We began to look for a malfunction. Knowing the MiG-3 well, I asked to check the fuel in the rear tank. After all, the gas pump takes fuel from it and injects it into the carburetor. Soon uncovered the cause of the engine failure. It turned out that when replacing the centroplane gas tanks, someone from the technicians incorrectly installed safety valves. Therefore, fuel from the centroplane tanks did not flow into the rear tank, which was used to power the engine. A small amount of fuel, leaking through the valves, flowed by gravity and for a while provided the engine. Technicians surrounded the airplane, began to eliminate the malfunction. I look at them and think here is another example of the rapid development of MiGs. I remembered Semenov's mistakes that led to his death. The mistake of an airplane technician could also end tragically. The regiment commander, having heard Kopilov's report on the reasons for the aborted takeoff, became furious. I've never seen him like that. Slacker. I'll court-martial him. He threatened the technician, almost killed the pilot and the airplane. And he understood better than any of us how his mistake could end. He stood confused, unable to utter a word in his defense. It is not him who should be judged, Comrade Commander, but those who sent us new planes late. He almost killed you, and you justify it, the commander responded to my remark. Kopylov assigned Vakhnenko to Pokrishkin's plane as a technician. Hearing this order, Vakhnenko smiled happily at me. We have a long-standing, friendly relationship with him. We eliminated the malfunction on the airplane relatively quickly. By this time, Sokolov's group returned from the mission. One airplane was not in its composition. The pilots told us what had happened. The strikes on this airfield in the previous days were carried out, as before, by separate links. This method could not bring tangible results, but alarmed the enemy. In anticipation of another raid, the enemy raised 18 fighters in the air. They met our group over the airfield. It was unprofitable to engage them in battle. Therefore the MiGs, dropping bombs from diving on the parking lots of enemy aircraft, took up air defense and began to leave in the eastern direction. During this period, the commander of the 3rd Squadron, Nazarov, broke away from the main group. He was immediately attacked by Messers. On the burning airplane, the pilot crashed into the ground. In the evening before leaving for the hostel, we gave our squadron the task to fly again tomorrow to attack the airfield in Balti. The division headquarters continued to maintain a schedule of raids on this target. In the morning, Sokolov gathered the flying staff, gave instructions on the preparation for a combat flight. Listening to him, the pilots thought about a possible meeting with enemy fighters, the strong anti-aircraft coverage of the airfield, under fire which will have to storm the enemy planes. The squadron commander tried to take into account the experience of the previous flight. 2 links were planned for a bombing strike and subsequent assault with machine gun fire. My pair was tasked to cover the attackers from enemy fighters and suppress anti-aircraft fire. We were flying at a strafing run. Before the border of the enemy airfield, the group made a hill for dropping bombs. We with Dyachenko immediately went up. There were no Messerschmitts in the air. I cast a glance at the airfield. The group worked accurately. Bombs burst among the Messers, Junkers and gasoline refuelers. Explosions, flames, smoke. This is retaliation for their raids. We caught the enemy successfully. There was refueling of airplanes with fuel. Having regained their senses, anti-aircraft gunners opened fire on our fighters. My Dyachenko and I immediately attacked the Earlikon batteries. We're dive bombing. I see anti-aircraft gunners running for cover. The guns are silent for a while. Other batteries, and there are a lot of them around the airfield, cross fire traces on our planes. My pair storms the batteries one by one. But we're outnumbered. We are not able to suppress anti-aircraft gunners. I notice that the Mi-109 started the engine, cut down on the start. I throw my MiG in a dive at him, take the Messer in the sight, and stitch it with a Q. In gaining altitude machine gun, anti-aircraft trace hits the wing console of my plane. But it stays in the air, and from the attacked Messer poured smoke. The pilot does not jump out of the cockpit, apparently wounded or killed. Miji make the last combat run. They have to take a course home at a glancing flight, and the enemy anti-aircraft guns continue to fire. We with Dyachenko dive on them, providing a safe departure from the airfield of our MiGs. I catch up with the group and see only 4 airplanes. Where are the other 2? I look around, no airplanes in the air. I turn back and look at the enemy airfield, but even above it there are no stragglers. And the anti-aircraft guns aren't firing. Apparently 2 MiGs were damaged and left earlier. Once again I look at the sky, not a single airplane. I'm catching up with the group, flying home, and the anxiety is increasingly overwhelming me. I'm trying to reconstruct in my memory all the dynamics of the assault. None of our airplane on the airfield did not fall. Consciousness does not want to accept the possible death of any of the pilots. I want to believe that they go somewhere aside or ahead of the 4 on damaged aircraft. Immediately after landing, I turn off and look at our parking lots. There are no airplanes Sokolov and Ovsyankin. We gathered as a group and had no time to share our thoughts before Ivanov arrived. He began to ask the pilots about Sokolov's pair. No one could report anything specific and reliable. According to scrappy data, could only assume that at the end of the assault pair, Sokolov began to move away from the airfield. It looked as if it was taking up a position to launch another attack, but no one saw them further away. And no wonder everyone was busy with the fulfillment of the combat task. The joy of a successful blow to the enemy was darkened. Sokolov and Ovsyankin were not with us. All the following days, having returned from combat missions, pilots were first of all interested in whether there were no reports about Sokolov and his partner, but the headquarters of the regiment and division had no data. However, we stopped storming the airfield in Balti. Other concerns appeared at the command. German and Romanian troops came to the Dniester near Bender. They began to accumulate there. Apparently they were preparing an attack on Odessa. North of Balta also the situation was tense. Therefore, thinned in its composition, fighter regiments of our division switched to these 2 directions. A day after our raid on the airfield of Balti, I was called VP Ivanov. Pokrishkin, take the squadron, ordered the regiment commander. And what about Sokolov? If he returns, he will go to me as deputy. And what will the division commander say? It's not your concern. Without a squadron commander, we can't. Take over and command. Yes, accept the squadron. Comrade regimental commander, may I make a few thoughts at the same time? If we keep fighting like this, we'll soon have no one to command. The war, Pokrishkin. Casualties are inevitable. We blame everything on the war. I couldn't help myself. The thing is that we are sent on missions in small groups. In such conditions it is difficult to suppress the enemy anti-aircraft gunners. And the enemy has a strong cover. Yes, you have flown and seen. I understand all that. That's why I'm sending you in groups of 6 or 8, not in separate units. I ask you to take this into account. Understood, Comrade Commander. Well, that's the deal. Now prepare the squadron for a flight to the airfield Razdelnaya. There, together with the 4th Air Regiment, you'll carry out missions. I'll be there by evening. Yes. I'll try not to disgrace my regiment. In Razdelnaya, squadron immediately received the task to attack enemy columns on the road from Kishinev to the Dniester, and my pair was ordered to cover a group of fighters of the 4th Air Regiment when they struck the Kishinev airfield. We approached the target at extremely low altitude. The group made a slide, dropped bombs on standing airplanes, and immediately left in the southern direction. My pair, as covering the group, should not have lingered over the airfield. But can you just leave with ammunition? Having dived steeply, we broke through the strong anti-aircraft fire and, passing into a gentle dive near the ground, hit the planes. I lit up the U-87s. Shaving our pair went to catch up with the departing 6. All returned without losses. This day and the next morning we all squadron stormed the columns on the roads. To avoid losses, we acted in full squadron, just as we did in Sinseri. On the second day, in the evening, Ivanov gave me an unexpected task. North is very alarming situation. Prepare your squadron to escort the bombers familiar to you. Su-2s? It's good that you remember, Viktor Petrovich grinned. Now try to justify yourself to them. They will go to bomb the crossings in Mogilev-Podolsky. Your group is a strike group. Meet over the airfield in Kotovsky. The flight is immediate. Permit me to fly in 2 pairs. You'll fly in 3s. I can't give you more. There are a lot of other tasks, but not enough airplanes. I wish you success.